At the age of 25, I finally married Professor Augustine, a renowned medical expert. He was extremely controlling but didn't love me. The only reason he cared was because I carried the heart of his unforgettable first love. Augustine once said, "Live well, and I'll agree to anything." Later, when I was gravely ill and on the brink of death, Augustine used every possible means to keep me alive. Vale, you must live on, if only for the sake of this heart, until the day his unforgettable first love, who had been thought dead, returned. I took my last breath, and Augustine went mad. Chapter 1. Years after graduation, the story of how I captured the attention of the legendary surgeon, Professor Augustine, still circulates among my classmates. On an ordinary weekend, after 3 years apart, old classmates gathered for a reunion. In the midst of the lively conversation, the class president asked me, "Vale, why didn't Senior Sue come?" I awkwardly replied, "He has surgery tonight." Many of our classmates who had done quite well for themselves attended today's gathering. However, when it comes to success, none could compare to Professor Augustine, a famous medical figure at a university. In his early 30s, he had already made remarkable achievements in human organ transplantation. His hands were worth a fortune. The class president's invitation to me was mostly because of Augustine. I remember back then, Vale went through a lot to win over Senior Sue, right? Someone brought it up, and suddenly, everyone was interested. "Yeah, Vale, how did you manage it?" With a slight bitterness in my smile, I responded, "It just happened." They all thought I had kept quiet, only to suddenly win over the unattainable flower of the medical school. What they didn't know was that behind this perfect match lay endless bitterness. If I could go back in time, I'd rather never have met Augustine. Chapter 2. When Augustine arrived, the gathering was nearly over. He had just finished surgery, and as he entered the room, the smell of disinfectant cut through the lingering scent of alcohol. He was the same as ever, dignified and distant, out of reach. The classmates treated him as if they were meeting a celebrity. Everyone stood up to greet him. The class president, caught up in the excitement, casually mentioned, "By the way, Professor Zhao said the slot for the trip to Europe next month is reserved for Vale. I hope Professor Sue won't be too reluctant to let her go." I stiffened, feeling suddenly nervous as I looked at Augustine. I hadn't found the right time to tell him about this. Now, he was hearing it from someone else. Augustine paused, then smiled faintly and said, "She's a light sleeper and doesn't rest well in new places, so she probably won't be able to go. I'll talk to Professor Zhao myself." He then patted my head. "Be good and stay home. I'll take you on vacation next month." His words immediately stirred envy among the others. "Vale, you're so lucky in your married life. I'm jealous. If you have it so good, why even bother going to Europe? Just stay." But I had been working for that opportunity for a long time. I picked up my bag and forced a smile. "Sorry. Something came up at home. I have to go." With that, I turned and left. As I stepped out into the cold air, a gust of wind blew, and a jacket was draped over my shoulders. The familiar scent of disinfectant grew stronger. "It's too cold to go out on a rainy day. You can't handle it." I smiled slightly, dropping any thoughts of arguing. "Okay." On the way home, Augustine drove. After hesitating for a long time, I brought up the topic again. "Next month, I don't want to go on vacation. I want to go to Europe." Augustine tapped the steering wheel without responding. Whenever he acted like this, it meant he was considering rejecting my suggestion. "I won't joke around with my health. I promise." As we waited at a red light, Augustine turned to look at me. His calm, composed gaze pierced through the night. "Vale, I'm not willing to take the risk." My smile faltered, and a dull ache spread through my chest. He was far more concerned about my health than I was, because the heart beating in my chest, warm and strong, didn't belong to me. It belonged to his unforgettable first love, Angelica. All of my passions and pursuits had to yield to this heart. The world believed Augustine loved me deeply, but little did they know that this heart was the only thing that could truly capture his soul. Chapter 3. On the way back, Augustine and I fell into a cold war. When we got out of the car, I walked ahead without caring whether Augustine followed. I almost slammed the door on his hand. Vale, don't throw a tantrum, I stubbornly responded. I am a person, not one of your possessions. Is it wrong for me to want to pursue my dreams? Augustine wrapped his arms around my waist, pinning me against the entryway, and gently placed a cold kiss on my lips. Vale, you don't lack anything. Bags, shoes, clothes, jewelry, even the envy of others, you have it all. Why would you want to go out there and suffer? Indeed, Augustine had given me so much. Under his protection, I could have lived a peaceful life, but that's not what I wanted. I pushed away his touch, and for the first time, spoke to him with a hardened tone. I'm not asking for your permission. I didn't want to look back on my life, dying from illness, filled with regret. The atmosphere grew tense. Augustine's deep eyes were hidden in the darkness, making it impossible to read his emotions. A soft chuckle echoed, spreading coldness. Vale, I can't control you anymore, can I? He lifted me in his arms and carried me to the bedroom. The kisses he left were filled with affection, pulling me into a swirl of emotions. Augustine knew too well how to make me give in, and those hands, used to performing surgeries, always made me surrender and compromise. Be good, okay? You know I can't live without you, Vale. I'll love you for the rest of my life. I looked up at him, this man who passionately declared his love. Who could have guessed that before the heart transplant? Augustine had been indifferent to me? After the surgery, it was as if overnight, he had become madly in love with me, obsessed with controlling me. Back then, I thought he loved me to death. It wasn't until later that I realized it was because he had personally placed Angelica's heart inside my chest. But by the time I knew the truth, it was too late. It was late at night, and Augustine, still upset over my outburst, stopped comforting me. He wiped away my tears, his fingertips grazing the scar on my chest. Vale, I performed your surgery myself. I'm responsible for your body. I'd heard this reason too many times before, but this time, I didn't care anymore. Chapter 4. Augustine bathed me, and just as we finished cleaning up, he received a call. On the other end came the sound of a woman sobbing. Brother-in-law. I accidentally broke the vase that my sister left behind. I'm sorry. Lying in bed, I didn't need to guess. It was Angelica's sister calling. Her name was Alice, a university student, still in her prime. She bore an uncanny resemblance to Angelica. I remembered when Angelica passed away. She was about Alice's age, perhaps because Alice looked so much like Angelica. Augustine covered all her tuition and living expenses. Augustine had explained, she's Angelica's sister. I have a duty to take care of her. As a result, Alice loved flaunting this in front of me. Her favorite thing to say was, if it weren't for the fact that you have my sister's heart, Augustine would have married me. After hanging up the phone, Augustine got dressed, but I stopped him. It's late. It's just a broken vase. You can go tomorrow. I couldn't accept it. Why was a living, breathing person worth less than a broken vase? Augustine's gaze turned cold in the darkness. He pushed me back onto the bed and dodged the issue. Get some sleep. Good night. With the soft sound of the door closing, Augustine left. Soon after, I received a message from Alice. Just a vase? Hilarious. What makes you think you can compare to me and my sister? You're just a container. Don't think you're anything special. It turned out that when I had stopped Augustine, he hadn't ended the call. The freshly washed hair gradually dried in the breeze, and my body grew completely cold. I was so furious that I replied, "Look who's talking. Eating your sister's blood-stained bread. You're no saint either." As I put down my phone, my thoughts drifted to 3 years ago. Chapter 5. That summer, the news of the death of the famous violinist Angelica swept across the internet. Media outlets and social networks were filled with regret for such a genius passing away so young. At that time, the biggest rumor circulating at school was that Angelica had been Augustine's girlfriend, a musical prodigy and a medical genius, a perfect match. But despite all the time I'd spent chasing after Augustine, I'd never seen Angelica by his side. Upon hearing the news, I rushed to the hospital where Augustine worked to wait for him. I anxiously waited for days before I finally saw him. He was the same as ever, impeccably clean to the point of obsession. Nothing about him suggested the grief-stricken, skeletal man that the rumors had described. That day was the happiest of my life, because it was the first time Augustine spoke to me for such a long time. He said, "Valentina, do you have a congenital heart condition and are waiting for a transplant? I found a donor. I can help you. If you agree, you'll soon be able to undergo the transplant surgery." It felt like a dream come true. The doctors had said that if I didn't undergo a heart transplant, I might not live past my 20s. Having the surgery might extend my life. So, without hesitation, I agreed. That day, I lay on the cold metal bed in the operating room, and the man I loved stood above me in a green surgical gown, bathed in the harsh white light like a godsend to save me. When I woke up, Augustine was by my side, his gentle gaze enveloping me. He said, "Vale, will you be my girlfriend?" Had I never known whose heart it was, maybe my life would have been filled with happiness forever. Chapter 6. I barely slept the entire night. Early the next morning, I received a call from my assistant. "Sister Vale, the spot for Europe is gone." I sat up in bed, feeling dazed. That was a spot Professor Zhao specifically reserved for me. How could it be gone? "I heard that someone from your school, a very influential senior, pulled some strings and got in." Before I could respond to my assistant, I got a message from Professor Zhao. "If you're not feeling well, don't push yourself. Get some rest." I hurriedly called Professor Zhao back. "Professor Zhao, I'm feeling fine." Professor Zhao sounded confused. "Huh? Augustine called me this morning to cancel, saying you weren't feeling well. He didn't discuss this with me." "Professor Zhao, I've been waiting for this opportunity for over half a year. Can't I still? It's too late." Professor Zhao sighed. He recommended a girl named Alice, and the list has already been submitted. At this point, I had no choice but to plead desperately. "Professor Zhao, even if it's as a volunteer or a temporary worker, as long as I can go to Europe with the team, I'll take it." "Well, all right. I'll see what I can do. Wait for my update." After dealing with that, I scrolled through Alice's social media. She had posted a photo of the application form. Another day of being pampered. Someone commented, "That expedition is so hard to get into. You actually made it in." Alice replied with a smirking emoji. "What can I say? He spoils me, ha ha ha." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. After taking my medication, I decided to confront Augustine. He hadn't come home last night. He sent me a message in the middle of the night saying he had been called back to the hospital for surgery. When I got to the hospital, I first went to pick up the report. It was from the physical examination Augustine had arranged for me a week ago. It showed everything was normal, heart function was good, and moderate exercise was allowed. I had planned to use this report to convince him to let me go to Europe. As I approached his office, I overheard a conversation inside. "Valentina has been waiting so long for this. Canceling it like that is too much, don't you think?" The voice belonged to Augustine's university roommate and current colleague, Eric. Augustine's tone was indifferent. "If something happens to her abroad, I won't be able to do anything. Come on. I saw her report. As long as she takes her medication, she's as healthy as anyone else. We're professionals here. Don't give me that nonsense." Augustine didn't respond. Eric probed further. "Don't tell me this is all for that other girl?" "It is." Even though I knew the truth, hearing Augustine admit it so bluntly was still excruciating. Augustine's voice was cold and calm. "I don't care about her life or death, but the heart must be fine." With those words, my heart skipped a beat. What followed was a relentless, throbbing pain, clutching my chest. I slowly sank to the floor, tears falling uncontrollably. When I had first learned the truth about our marriage from Alice's lips, I had cried my heart out. For a long time, I kept telling myself that people aren't made of stone. Surely, with time, he would come to care for me. But the truth proved otherwise. Augustine's heart was made of stone. That day, I didn't barge into the office. I sat numbly on a bench in the hospital for a long time, until I got a message from Professor Zhao. "There's a volunteer spot, but the work will be tough. Are you still interested?" Without thinking, I immediately accepted. Professor Zhao confirmed. "Pack your things quickly. The team leaves today." On the way back, I sat in the taxi, doing my best to stifle my sobs. Augustine called, but I hung up. I focused on packing my things for the airport. Before leaving, I took some important documents with me, because I had made up my mind to get a divorce. Chapter 7. Alice had a complex expression when she saw me at the airport. I was wearing a volunteer's uniform, carrying a box of bottled water, and walked up to each member waiting to board, letting them take one from inside. Alice, young and bold, couldn't hide her little thoughts. She waved at me with a smug grin. "Come over here. I'm thirsty." I ignored her and went straight to MS. Zhao. Would you like some water? Alice got annoyed. Are you deaf? Didn't you hear me talking to you? Using my sister's heart as if it's something you deserve. I coldly snapped back. Donate a kidney, and I'll get down on my knees. I'm not someone who easily loses my temper, but seeing that face, I couldn't hold it in. I think I'm going crazy. Every time I see Alice, I just want to hit her. Alice called out in a spoiled tone. Is this how you treat the family of the organ donor? Her words drew the attention of the people around us, and some even started filming with their phones. Zhao frowned. Enough. If you want water, get it yourself. Stop causing a scene. It had been so long since anyone had spoken up for me that I lowered my head, sitting next to her with slightly reddened eyes. Zhao. I'm sorry for causing trouble. Zhao sighed. I didn't call you here to let you be bullied. Alice huffed, turned away, and began typing furiously on her phone. The boarding announcement echoed, and everyone started to board the plane. After a flight of more than 20 hours, we arrived in Europe. As soon as the plane landed, my phone lit up with several missed calls. They were all from Augustine. I didn't want to deal with him, but he called Alice instead. After a few brief words, Alice handed the phone to me, her face gleeful. Augustine's voice, cold as ice, came clearly through the receiver. Vale, why did you act on your own? He sounded obviously angry, like the last time when I brought up the divorce. My heart was filled with grievance, and I replied dryly. When you gave Alice the spot without consulting me, you didn't ask for my opinion either. Alice let out a derisive snicker, as if laughing at my foolishness. On the other end, there was a long silence, so long that it made me feel uneasy. I thought Augustine was going to yell at me, but he said nothing and hung up the phone instead. The sound of the disconnecting line shattered all my plans. No apology, no explanation, not even a question. All of his anger was left in the abrupt end of the call, leaving me to endlessly second-guess myself. Had I done something wrong? Soon, I realized that this wasn't right. I wasn't wrong. It was just that Augustine's control over me all these years made me feel like I was. I wiped away my tears and threw the phone back at Alice. She yelped in surprise, clearly startled. Chapter 8. The next day, just before we set off for Vienna, I saw Augustine at the hotel entrance. Alice and I had just stepped out of the elevator. When she saw Augustine, her eyes lit up, and she rushed over. Brother-in-law. Even after all this time since Angelica's passing, Alice insisted on calling him that, and Augustine never corrected her. His cold gaze softened in an instant. I need to talk to your sister Valentina. I'll take you to dinner later. Alice smiled sweetly. Okay. She shot me a smug look, and I knew it was her who had tipped him off. Augustine's tone turned serious. Vale, we need to talk. From the corner of the hotel lobby came the sharp sound of my voice. I don't think I did anything wrong. Don't you dare yell at me. My emotions got the best of me, and I couldn't help the tears in my eyes. Augustine sat across from me, his dark eyes locked onto my face. For a moment, I thought he wanted to strangle me, but that feeling quickly passed. He returned to his calm, polished self. His tone was steady. You didn't do anything wrong. The mistake was mine. What do you mean? My mistake was not completely cutting off your path, Augustine said, sipping his tea slowly. Go ahead and play this time, but there won't be a next time. I knew that with his connections, he could easily make that happen. I shot to my feet, furious. Augustine, what gives you the right to control me? I have the right to make my own choices. Rights? He let out a cold laugh, no longer showing any mercy. With someone else's heart in your chest, What rights do you think you have? He finally said it. The words I had feared, blunt, cruel, and direct. So, in his eyes, I should just be eternally grateful for being the vessel of this heart. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and suffocating. I picked up the glass of water in front of me and threw it at Augustine's face. I am a heart transplant patient, not your prisoner. The lemon water dripped down Augustine's jaw. Slowly, for the first time, I saw a mocking look in his dark eyes. He said nothing, but Alice rushed over in a panic, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe his face. Valentina, who gave you permission to treat my brother-in-law like this? I couldn't take it anymore, and I threw the water at her too. My emotions surged, making my heart race painfully. Everything went dark for a moment. Alice screamed, drenched from head to toe. Brother-in-law, is she crazy? Augustine's expression turned icy. I thought he would yell at me, demand I apologize to Alice. But calmly, he asked a server for some napkins and handed them to Alice. Then, he smiled apologetically at the server, speaking in perfect English. Sorry, my wife hasn't been feeling well lately. Apologies for the trouble. Everyone around us heard his words. In front of everyone, Augustine painted me as a madwoman. Then he looked at Alice with a quiet warning in his eyes. Aren't you hungry? Let's go eat. Alice, realizing she had messed up, stuck out her tongue. Okay, Augustine. My chest tightened, and I instinctively called his name. In a disappointed tone, Augustine said, I'm heading to Vienna for a conference soon. Do whatever you want. I can't control you anymore. Just remember to take your meds on time. After the heart transplant, I have to take medication long-term to prevent organ rejection. It's the phrase he says to me most often. Then, he walked away with Alice in tow, and I, feeling unwell, returned to the hotel. The service wasn't great. The food they brought was cold. I forced a few bites before lying back down on the bed. I opened my phone and saw Alice's social media post. The weather was nice, and Alice and Augustine were sitting at a fast food restaurant. In front of Alice was a kid's meal. Augustine sat across from her, looking at his phone, a trace of a helpless smile on his lips. I felt a twinge of sadness. Even Alice seemed to have more freedom than I did. She could do whatever she wanted. If something went wrong, Augustine would back her up. But because of this heart, I have to tread on eggshells. No drinking, no junk food, no late nights, no intense emotions. I don't even have the right to be happy. Even smiling in front of Augustine feels like a crime. What a joyless life this has become. Chapter 9. The next part of our itinerary proceeded smoothly according to the delegation's plan. On the third day, we arrived in Vienna. Augustine forcibly delayed his schedule until the end of the month. Eric sent me a message. Impressive, Valentina. You've got Professor Sue so captivated that the dean said if he doesn't come back soon, his pay will be docked. I replied with a facepalm emoji. I figured Augustine wasn't delaying his schedule for me. Vienna was a place Angelica had spent time in, more than once. I'd heard Alice beg Augustine to take her there to honor her sister's memory. As the evening darkened, the streets filled with people. The delegation was counting the number of people going to the concert. There were only 2 tickets left, and Alice said, Valentina has a heart condition and is a volunteer, so she doesn't need to go. According to the rules, volunteers should indeed be at the end of the line, but one of those tickets was given to me by Ms. Zhao. Without batting an eye, I walked past Alice and grabbed a ticket from the leader's hand. Alice stomped her foot in anger. Valentina, who gave you permission to take that ticket? I ignored her shouting and headed toward the concert hall. What I didn't expect was for her to call Augustine. A few minutes later, she rushed over, holding her phone on speaker, bumping into me as she did. Vale, you can't go to crowded places. Be good. This is for your own good. Here it was again. Every time, I would convince myself that Augustine was doing it for my sake. But this time? Was it still the same? Augustine, can you shut up? My voice was trembling. Just this once. I beg you to shut up. She already has a ticket, even if I have to waste it. She won't get it. Augustine paused. Fine. Alice, thrown off by his compromise, glared at me, unwilling to accept it. I knew her initial plan was to go with Augustine herself. She hadn't expected Augustine couldn't control me. As we went to have our tickets checked, a staff member suddenly stopped me. "Ma'am, your family member called us to say you have a serious heart condition and provided medical documentation. We can't allow you to enter for your own health." Everyone had already passed security and was waiting for me. It was awkward. I patiently explained to the staff, "My heart condition is stable. Sorry, we can't make that determination." Suddenly, all eyes were on me. Some were filled with sympathy, others with surprise. After all, no one expected that. As my husband, Augustine would use such tactics to prevent his own wife from entering. Everyone in the group knew my condition had stabilized, and that a simple concert wouldn't cause any harm. But Augustine was too authoritative, and no profit-driven venue was willing to take on that kind of risk. Alice, blocked behind me, intentionally bumped into me and squeezed past. She stuck her tongue out at me triumphantly. "Your ticket is invalid now." At that moment, I had only one thought. If I couldn't see the concert, neither could she. I suddenly raised my hand and slapped her, grabbing her hair and dragging her back out through the gate. Alice screamed in pain as I yanked hard. For the next few minutes, we were caught in a physical struggle. She was young and strong. If you think about it, it was mutual combat. Honestly, I didn't want to embarrass myself in a foreign country like this, but I had bottled up too much frustration, and if I didn't fight back, I would have lost my mind. By the time Augustine arrived, Alice was sitting on the ground, bawling, and I sat silently by the fountain, blood trickling down from my forehead. Alice threw herself into Augustine's arms, tearfully complaining, "Brother-in-law, how could she? How dare she hit me?" Augustine draped his coat over Alice, not even asking for the details, and directly ordered me, "Vale, apologize." I trembled with anger. "Why isn't she apologizing to me?" "Because you started it." I lost control and shouted at him, "You should know why I hit her." I could feel my heart racing, my breathing becoming rapid, and a cold chill running through my body. Augustine spoke coldly, setting everything else aside. "Do you not know your own health condition? She's doing this for your good, and you still think you're in the right?" This time, I said nothing. I curled up by the fountain, trying to suppress my escalating emotions and weakening body. Nightfall thickened, and the neon lights along the street flickered on. Alice thought she had won and continued her petty attack, whispering to Augustine, "I've never seen such an overconfident woman. If she had given it to me earlier, this whole mess wouldn't have happened. What a troublemaker." As the fountain burst into a dazzling spray of water, I stiffened like a stone and toppled backward into the pool. Chapter 10. My heart condition relapsed. I was rushed to the local hospital. They say that during the emergency, Augustine almost lost control and tried to break into the operating room. In the end, it took several people to hold him back. Alice, eyes wide open, mocked my weak body on the side, and Augustine yelled at her on the spot. He even called her a useless fool. Alice boarded the flight back home in tears. I brushed past death once more, and when I woke up, I saw Augustine sitting by my bedside. He looked worn out, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. His dark, intense gaze sent a chill down my spine, but for the first time, I felt relief. So, he does suffer too. Watching the heart of someone you love gradually stop beating must be painful, right? I looked at him and calmly said, "Let's get a divorce." Though he cared for me meticulously, he never treated me with dignity. I didn't want to live like this anymore. At my words, Augustine let out a mocking laugh. "Divorce? You think I'd ever let you go?" He uncharacteristically lost his temper with me. "I told you not to come to Europe. Why didn't you listen? Don't you know heart patients need to control their emotions? With a body as weak as yours, you still dared to fight with Alice? Valentina, you're always so self-righteous." Each sentence was more cutting than the last. His fear over the past few days had made him take it out on me, but he forgot that if it weren't for Alice, this trip to Europe could have been peaceful. I closed my eyes, not wanting to argue with him anymore. Suddenly, Augustine grabbed my face, forcing me to look at him. He warned me word by word, "Valentina, Take care of yourself. Don't stir up any more trouble. Got it? I smiled. Augustine, I don't think I have much time left. Can't you just treat me a little better? Augustine, hearing this, stormed out in a rage, slamming the door behind him. Chapter 11. I spent a long time recovering, and by the time I was discharged, I had lost a lot of weight. After this episode, my body was far from what it used to be. I could barely walk a few steps without getting short of breath. This delay stretched into April. The willows were blooming, and the grass was growing. I returned home. Currently, I'm in a one-sided cold war with Augustine. After returning, I went straight to my bedroom. Augustine followed me, reminding me, I've fallen behind on work, so I'll be staying at the hospital for a few days. The medication is on the bedside table. Make sure you take it. Okay. In truth, I didn't care where he was going. Maybe he was off to comfort the heartbroken Alice. Maybe it was for something else. But none of that concerned me anymore. After Augustine left, I picked up my phone and consulted a lawyer. The lawyer said that if Augustine didn't agree, I might have to be separated for over a year before the divorce could be finalized. So, I began secretly looking for houses in other cities behind Augustine's back. However, ever since my last hospital stay, my health hasn't been great. I often experience chest tightness and palpitations. I secretly went to see another doctor, and the prognosis wasn't optimistic. I didn't dare think about it. But maybe, before a year was up, Augustine would become a widower. That day, I visited several places with a real estate agent. By 12:30 p.m., passing by a small park, I was exhausted and had to sit down, watching the nearby children feed the pigeons. I saw a post Alice had just updated on her social media, saying, "An old man's apology is still so moving." I chuckled and casually tossed my phone back into my pocket. The midday sun was warm, heating up my hair and jacket. Suddenly, someone stood in front of me, blocking the sunlight. "You must be Valentina?" It was a woman's voice. I opened my eyes and met a face that was both familiar and unfamiliar, leaving me momentarily stunned. I had seen this face before, in one of Augustine's secret photos. Why did she look exactly like Angelica? The woman smiled as she brushed her hair aside. "I heard from my sister that you bullied her. All these years, you all seemed to think I was dead." Seeing me staring at her dumbfounded, Angelica gave a proud, cold smile. "Hello, let me formally introduce myself. I'm Augustine's first love, Angelica. Can you keep it a secret for me? I want to surprise him." She seemed to expect to see fear on my face. The fear of losing Augustine, but the heavy pain in my chest, like a boulder pressing down, left me struggling for breath. If Angelica is alive, then whose heart do I have? Angelica noticed my shock and offered an explanation. "Your heart was donated by my fellow senior from the academy, and our professor helped transport it back home. Somehow, people spread the rumor that it was my heart. I've always been afraid to see Augustine, fearing he'd blame me for leaving without saying goodbye. Now that I'm back, can you return him to me?" I forced myself to stand and walked back the way I came. Tears streamed down my face. So, all these years of torment were a joke. I could have been living happily. The wind picked up, and the air around me grew cold. Shivering, I pulled out my phone, intending to call Augustine. The moment the call connected, everything went black, and I collapsed forward. Chapter 12. I was admitted to the ICU. They say Augustine used every possible method to pull me back from death's door. Of course, it came at a price. My body was covered in tubes. A long white tube connected the ventilator at the head of my bed, its end inserted into my throat. I couldn't speak. Many people came to see me, telling me that I would get better. But I wasn't stupid. Their expressions told me I didn't have much time left. When I woke from the endless dreams, someone was holding my hand. Augustine stood by my side, wearing a white coat, gazing at me tenderly. "Vale, you're awake." Those were the first words he said to me years ago after I received my transplant. Back then, they sounded like music to my ears. Now, they felt like the devil's whisper. Instinctively, I tried to pull out the tubes, only to realize my hands and feet were restrained. Augustine gently coaxed me, Be good. Focus on getting better. Don't resist. I remembered telling Augustine once that if I ever reached a terminal stage, I didn't want to be resuscitated. I had seen patients lying in the ICU, just like I was now, stripped of dignity, manipulated at the mercy of others. But obviously, Augustine hadn't respected my wishes. He was my next of kin. He chose to use every possible method to keep me alive until the bitter end. Of course. How could I expect him to show me mercy? He never loved me, only the heart that beats inside me. Doesn't he know Angelica is still alive? I began thrashing my hands, tied to the railing, trying to tell him the truth. Augustine frowned. Give her a sedative. Then, he gently smoothed my messy hair and placed a soft kiss on my forehead. Vale. Sleep now. Don't worry. I'll stay with you. Uncontrollably. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep sleep. I don't even know how many times I've passed through death's door by now. It's an unbearable feeling. Each time I was brought back from unconsciousness, I sank into deeper despair. Even the nurses whispered in pity. Professor Sue is so cruel. He's revived her 6 times now, and she's broken several ribs. If I were her family, I'd let her go with dignity. Exactly. Even the people around me understand what Augustine can't. Augustine hasn't visited me as often lately, because every time he came, I caused a scene, once or twice. He could still be patient and comfort me, but as it happened more often, he became annoyed. Vale, who do you think is to blame for this? Didn't you insist on going to Europe? Be good, will you? As time went on, I gave up trying to tell Augustine the truth. After all, I couldn't speak. My body was too weak, and I was too far gone. Even writing was difficult. In the end, even dying became a luxury. I often wondered what Angelica was doing. Did she think it was fun, playing hide-and-seek with Augustine and refusing to show herself? If she had come earlier, could I have died with dignity? I lay in the ICU, day after day, night after night, having lost all sense of time. Then, on a warm afternoon, sunlight streamed through the window, landing on me. It reminded me of the time, years ago, after my surgery, full of hope. Suddenly, I felt this moment was filled with hope too. Back then, it was hope for life. Now, it was hope for death. My body felt light, as though I could write a few words. Augustine seemed to sense something, speaking absent-mindedly. Vale, please calm down, okay? If you survive, I'll give you whatever you want. This is a special medicine. Once you take it, you'll get better. How laughable. Was he comforting me or himself? Maybe Augustine hadn't even realized that since we got married. The phrase he said to me the most was take your medicine. He didn't even know what my favorite food was. Earlier, the nurse had loosened my restraints a bit, so I grabbed the pen nearby and started writing on the small whiteboard with all the strength I had. At the last moment, I wanted to leave something behind. I thought about it and began writing. Suddenly, the nurse walked in. Professor Sue, there's someone outside. She says her name is Angelica. Augustine froze. After a brief silence, he suddenly let go of my hand and rushed out. At the same time, everything went dark. I heard the sound of the monitor beeping. It announced that I was once again critically ill. But this time, Augustine probably wasn't coming back. Chapter 13. As Augustine rushed out of the office, he saw that familiar face. It was just like back then, clean, playful. Angelica, with her long, flowing hair, walked up to him with her hands behind her back and smiled. What's wrong, Professor? Don't recognize me? Angelica. Augustine felt a wave of disbelief, as though he had stepped into another world. He muttered, "Weren't you dead?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Angelica's face. Blame it on the reporters back then. Their language skills weren't up to par, and they misheard. I've been abroad all these years, completely unaware of how they reported on me back home. But that heart, Angelica blinked. That heart belonged to a senior member of our music troupe. She passed away in an accident, and her heart was sent back home, donated to a girl. At the mention of the girl, Augustine's heart sank. At that moment, Valentina suddenly occupied every part of his mind. Without a second thought, he ignored Angelica's calls and hurried back inside. It was as though some force was telling him that if he didn't return soon, he would never see Valentina again. As he pushed open the door, Augustine recalled how Valentina had been struggling to write something on the paper just moments ago. He suddenly had the urge to see it. Turning the corner, all he saw was a sea of white. Several colleagues in white coats surrounded Valentina's bed. On the monitor nearby, a flat line stretched across the screen, unyielding and final. There was no longer any movement. Augustine's mind went blank, a buzzing in his ears. He faintly heard Eric's voice. It sounded like he was announcing the time of death. Who had died? For the first time, Augustine found the sounds of the ICU machines intolerable. He pushed through the crowd and saw Valentina, her expression peaceful. Her face was pale, as if she were merely sleeping. Just minutes ago, Valentina had been looking at him, and it seemed like she had even smiled. Trying to write something, Augustine gently touched her face and called out, "Vale." The only response was a cold, lifeless body. An overwhelming sense of absurdity filled his mind. How could Valentina be dead? Eric's voice carried a sharp edge. Valentina had no family, and since you've just found your first love, I suppose you won't have time to handle her funeral arrangements. My wife and I will take care of it. It was only in these last few days that Eric had come to understand why Augustine had treated Valentina the way he did. All of this suffering, just for a heart, leaving her to die in agony. Word had spread in the department, and now no one was on Augustine's side. Suddenly, Augustine remembered something and quickly looked at Valentina's right hand. He saw the pen she had used, lying on the whiteboard next to her. In crooked, shaky handwriting, mixed with letters, was the faint outline of a sentence, "I like grilled fish." Augustine's mind flashed back to what he had said earlier. "Take your medicine, I like grilled fish." This seemingly simple statement now felt like a heavy blow, shattering his composure. In that moment, all their past was laid bare before him. It was painfully clear how awful he had been. He had told her countless times to take her medicine, but he didn't even know she liked grilled fish. Suddenly, Augustine lost control, grabbing Valentina's lifeless body from the bed. "Vale, get up! I'll take you to eat grilled fish." Eric and the nurses rushed forward, trying to restrain him. Augustine let out a desperate roar. "Let me go! I need to take her away." Eric, his patience gone, punched Augustine in the face. "Get a grip! Valentina is dead." Valentina had only just passed, her body still soft. In his frenzy, Augustine pulled her awkwardly, causing her head to hit the bed rail with a dull thud. Eric, now enraged, shouted, "Augustine, do you want me to call the police? If you loved her so much, why didn't you do something earlier?" Valentina had come to the department several times while she was alive. She had brought small gifts and helped out in little ways. Everyone had liked her. Now, watching her leave, they felt both relief and sorrow. Relief that her suffering had ended. Sorrow that such a kind person was gone. Augustine, now devoid of reason, clung to Valentina, silent for a long time. When Eric returned to the office, he found Angelica sitting at Augustine's desk, idly playing Minesweeper. "This is a hospital. Non-essential personnel must stay away from medical workstations." Eric felt a profound sadness. Angelica widened her eyes in surprise. "Me? I'm Angelica." Angelica, the name that had haunted Valentina's life, the name that had ultimately killed her, and yet Angelica dared to speak it with pride. Eric couldn't hold back anymore and asked, "I heard you've been back for a while. Why didn't you show up sooner?" "Of course. I was waiting for Valentina to die," Angelica said with a playful smirk. "I didn't want to be the other woman." Eric turned away in disgust. He didn't want to ask anything more, afraid he wouldn't be able to stop himself from hitting her. Chapter 14. Unexpectedly, after Valentina's death, Augustine did not end up with Angelica. He insisted on handling Valentina's funeral arrangements himself. The body couldn't be kept in the hospital for too long. Valentina was sent to the funeral home that very day. 3 days later, a farewell ceremony was held, and her body was cremated. Augustine thought Valentina had no family left and probably not many friends. But on the day of the farewell, the place was packed. The Eric couple was there. along with many classmates he had forgotten and friends from various walks of life he didn't recognize. Everyone's eyes were red, clearly from crying. Several old classmates approached him, offering solemn thanks. "Professor Sue, thank you for giving Vale so many more years. My condolences." Although said with no ill intention, the word struck Augustine like a slap across the face. He felt utterly ashamed, lowering his head with tears in his eyes. "This is a paper kite Vale made. I brought it with me, and this is a picture of her from that year we went skiing." Many relics were passed into Augustine's hands. At home, all he had packed of Valentina's were some personal items and a locked diary. It was only then Augustine realized he had never really known Valentina. She had a wide circle of friends, rich interests, loved off-roading, and craved adventure. Compared to the long, monotonous years that followed, Valentina's earlier life had been more like her name, short but brilliant. In recent years, Valentina had been like a withering tree, cautious, even asking his opinion before eating a bowl of grilled fish. He truly had treated her poorly. "Augustine, it seems like you haven't eaten breakfast. Why don't you join me for lunch?" Augustine looked up and saw Angelica's face. She had lipstick on, makeup done, even sparkly eyeshadow. He recognized it immediately. A wave of nausea washed over Augustine. "You don't have to mourn her. But there's no need to show up here all dolled up." These makeup tips were something Valentina had taught him back when they first got married. Every time they had a date, Valentina would dress up just like this. Augustine's voice wasn't quiet, drawing the attention of those nearby. Angelica looked flustered. "Augustine, I didn't mean to." "Leave," Augustine ordered, making it clear. Hostile glances followed Angelica as she turned pale and slipped out. Augustine didn't know what had come over him. Logically, he shouldn't have spoken to Angelica that way, but that's how he felt. He could almost hear Valentina's voice whispering in his ear. "Look, she wore makeup to my funeral. She's such a pretentious coquette. Kick her out." Augustine knew that if Vale were still around, she wouldn't be angry at him for this. After the funeral, everyone's life returned to normal, but Augustine remained stuck in the time when Valentina was still alive, unable to move forward. He stopped doing surgeries, retreating into the small house he had shared with Valentina. The acute pain of losing her gradually turned into a dull, constant ache over time. It wasn't just a heart he loved, but a person who had entered his life when he was young, stayed by his side for years, and ultimately became a handful of ashes. He found a way to unlock Valentina's diary. The first page read, "Yay, I married Augustine." Her delicate handwriting filled the page, brimming with excitement. Augustine's heart clenched as he turned the pages. In the early days of their marriage, Valentina had filled her diary with little details about their life together. "Yesterday, I bought him a tie, and today he wore it to work. He must think I have great taste." Augustine remembered that purple tie. At first, he didn't want to wear it to work, but one morning, Valentina, half asleep, had wandered over and tied it for him. She had simply forgotten. So many years had passed, and that tie was long gone. Augustine smiled to himself. Today it was pouring outside, and my colleagues and I were stuck downstairs with no taxis available. Augustine drove to pick me up. What a hero! So happy. Today we had a fight. So annoying, he actually forgot my birthday. Blocked him for 2 hours, 2 hours later. Okay, I admit, I was wrong. He had a surprise for me. Back then, Valentina hadn't known the truth behind his proposal, and like any new bride, she had shamelessly acted spoiled, demanding things from him, throwing tantrums. Those days, he hadn't really minded. He might have even liked it. Thinking back, it had been a long time, so long that if not for the diary, he couldn't remember what the real Valentina had been like. Augustine read every word slowly, immersed in those memories, losing track of time. He was surrounded by brief moments of happiness that suddenly came to an abrupt stop. So he really likes Angelica. A simple sentence lay on the page, her handwriting smudged. Valentina had cried when she wrote that, and as Augustine read it, it felt like his heart was being hollowed out. His lips trembled as he gently touched the page. Consumed by sorrow. Vale. Who told you that? Then, he found the answer. Alice, the young girl he had always treated like a child, cared for, and protected. I hate Alice. I hate Angelica. And I hate Augustine even more. I will never speak to Augustine again. Augustine's heart was in shreds. From that moment, Valentina had withered like a dying flower. Losing her spark, she no longer texted him as often, no longer asked him to do things. It was as if she suddenly grew up, quietly complying with everything he asked. Her diary entries, once frequent, dwindled to once every 2 weeks. Every word was filled with pain. Alice told me Augustine will marry her because she looks the most like her sister. I regret the surgery. From Valentina's diary, Augustine saw a different side of Alice. She was selfish, cruel, constantly tormenting Valentina with words until Valentina became withdrawn and depressed. The night before they went to Europe, Valentina had written one final line. I want a divorce. Augustine's tears fell. He wanted to get up and gather Valentina's belongings around him, but his frail body couldn't manage the movement. He accidentally knocked over Valentina's pill bottle. White pills scattered across the floor. Augustine went to pick them up, but when he touched the pills, he froze. It was as if he had made a startling discovery, frantically bringing the pills closer to examine them. Then, his body began to tremble. A terrifying growl erupted from his throat. After so many years in the medical field, how could he not recognize these? These weren't Valentina's medication at all but cheap supplements. Vale, why? He desperately searched through Valentina's belongings for clues, finding evidence that when they returned from Europe, Valentina had been chatting with friends, making plans for the next year. Valentina wouldn't have ended her own life, which meant only one thing: she hadn't known her pills had been switched. The possibility suffocated Augustine. He couldn't bear to think whether it had been an accident or intentional. Valentina was meticulous. She wouldn't have mixed up her health supplements with her life-saving medication. In the 3rd month after being locked in his house, Augustine reported it to the police. When people saw him again, they were shocked. He had lost a lot of weight, his eyes sunken, with the aura of a dying man. He sat before the police like a madman, repeatedly claiming his wife had been murdered. Though he had no proof, Angelica received a call from the police and hurried over. Alice followed behind, timidly saying, "Brother-in-law, please don't be like this. Valentina is already gone." These words triggered Augustine, and he glared at Alice, suddenly remembering something Professor Zhao had once mentioned. When they were in Europe, Alice had repeatedly tried to get close to Valentina, and Valentina's illness had worsened during that time. Angelica crouched in front of him, offering a gentle smile. "Augustine, it's all over. Come home with me, okay?" "Home?" Augustine stared blankly at her. "Yes, home. All right." He followed Angelica home. As soon as they entered, he frantically began searching through her things, with Angelica unable to stop him. Finally, in Angelica's room, Augustine found Valentina's pill bottle. It was identical to the one from her belongings. His hands shook as he poured out the pills. Seeing them, he began to sob uncontrollably. The switched pills were here, and Valentina had died never knowing. Angelica knelt beside him, helping Augustine up while casting a reproachful glance at Alice. "Ollie, what is going on?" Alice panicked but tried to remain defiant. "She took the wrong bottle in Europe herself. I haven't even blamed her for taking my supplements. I just wanted to punish that woman." Augustine lunged at Alice, grabbing her throat, yelling, "Do you know this could have killed her?" Angelica froze momentarily before pulling at Augustine's arm. "Augustine, please don't. She's my sister." Alice burst into tears. "I didn't know. I just wanted to teach her a lesson." "Sis, say something. Wasn't it you who said you'd come back once Valentina was dead? I helped you." Angelica's large tears rolled down her cheeks. "Don't talk nonsense." "I didn't." Both women were crying hysterically. Augustine, however, felt nothing but coldness. He had said such hurtful things to Vale, accusing her of being reckless, running off to Europe to die. But in the end, the one who caused her death was him. Valentina had done nothing wrong, but because of his indulgence and favoritism, she had lost her life. Augustine said nothing, pushed away Angelica clinging to him, and silently walked out. Angelica called after him, but Augustine no longer heard. There was only one thought in his mind: to avenge Valentina. 3 months after Valentina's death, a major event occurred in City A. Renowned medical Professor Augustine ran over 2 women repeatedly with his car, killing them. He then crashed the vehicle into a tree, the car sustaining severe damage. The perpetrator died on the spot. On Augustine's phone, he had left a message for Valentina. "I'm sorry." He had wanted to add "I love you," but Valentina probably wouldn't have liked it, so he left it unsaid. Chapter 15, Valentina's Postscript. The date for the heart transplant was set for early April, during the Festival of Ancestors. When all things are reborn, the surgery would be performed by the renowned surgeon Augustine, and as I lay on the operating table, looking at his face, my heart couldn't help but race. He was the man I had a crush on, but unfortunately, he had always been cold toward me. The anesthetist, trying to ease my tension, joked with a smile, "Do you have a thing for Professor Sue?" Maybe my face turned a little red. She noticed. She placed the mask over my nose and mouth and gently said, "Relax. Make a wish." I closed my eyes and silently thought, I want to marry Augustine. Perhaps because of that wish, I had a very long dream. I dreamt of things that never happened. It was more like a nightmare. In the dream, I lived a short and terrible life. Finally, struggling to wake up from the dream, the sound of the monitor beeping next to the bed greeted me. The white ceiling was lit by sunlight reflected from outside, with shadows of trees swaying, birds singing, and grass growing. I moved my eyes and saw the vibrant spring scene, full of hope. "Vale, you're awake." I turned my head and saw a familiar face. Augustine was sitting by the bed, wearing his white coat. Perhaps because of the contrast with the dream, he looked very young at that moment. Seeing me stare at him without saying a word, Augustine smiled slightly and held my hand. "The surgery was a success. Don't worry. In a few days, I'll take you for a walk." So, the surgery was over. That was good news. Seeing that I still didn't speak, Augustine gently asked, "Maybe, would you like to be my girlfriend?" At that moment, time seemed to flow back. Memories rushed in. Years of painful memories surfaced in my mind in an instant. It felt like another lifetime. I wasn't sure if those things were dreams or from a past life. I blinked, withdrew my hand from his, and looked out at the warm spring light, softly saying, "Dr. Sue, thank you for everything you've done for me, but I don't like you." The dream had left my thoughts in a mess, and I needed time to think clearly. Augustine froze, pursing his lips without saying a word. Not long after, I had recovered and met with Eric during his rounds. Eric winked at me. "Valentina, I heard you've been chasing Augustine. How did that go?" I said, "I gave up." "Gave up?" "Yeah." Eric smiled again. "That's good too. It's more important to find someone you like, who also likes you." On the day I was discharged, the spring weather was beautiful. Eric personally came to send me off. "You've recovered well. Remember to take your medication. You can eat some grilled fish. Just avoid the chili." "All right." Then he looked around and said, "Huh? Augustine is acting really strange. A few days ago, he said he was going to see you off, but this morning he was acting like he'd been possessed, muttering about atonement. No idea where he went." In the dream, Augustine drove me home that day, but now, I had to take a taxi myself. I smiled and said, "It doesn't matter." The taxi pulled up in front of the hospital and honked. I waved at Eric. "Goodbye, doctor. And thank you." That sleep during the surgery was deep. As if in the dream, I had lived an entire life. This kind of spring, it felt like I hadn't seen it in a long time. A child ran joyfully past me, holding up a kite. The scent of flowers filled the air. I didn't notice Augustine standing in the corner, his eyes red and his body trembling as he watched my back. Instead, I turned and walked into the warm spring light that belonged to me.